Good day, fellow adventurers. Welcome back to the show. You're all looking healthy. Hope you feel the same. Aren't you glad that pandemic thing is over? Things are actually getting back to normal. We traded in our truck for a new model and didn't even have to wait half a year for it to arrive. You guys come on in. We'll go for a drive here in a bit. But it's been a while. Glad to have you back. Welcome to Dresden's Tale, episode 68. This is season 3, volume 3, chapter 64 in our tasty tale. This is high military fantasy, the kind that needs heroes. Ours is Dresden Fane, master of ruining his own moods. He's a warrior of the Stone Clan, destined to find the dinner table and a puddle of gloom in every corner. I'm Lewis Nichols, your chauffeur on this trip to insanity. I'm the guy who wrote this thing, a crazy project spanning 2 decades and a whole cartload of Word documents. Thanks to YouTube, I now have a reasonable way to pass it on to you. A long time ago in a game system far, far away, Lizard Man meant a very specific thing. They were this great social humanoid monster in AD&D. You could run them a couple of dozen at a time. They were second level, and you could use a variety of weapons, or they might just bite you. You could scale them up for a variety of levels and situations. If you've watched any of my bestiary videos, you'll know that's all my favorite stuff. These days, when I say Lizard Man, as I have a couple of times recently, I could mean a whole lot of different things. It's like a game, just figure it out from the context. For me, Lizard Man is just an in-world slang for anything remotely reptilian that walks on 2 legs. It might be a pterodon, or even a Ranayan, even though they're technically amphibians. It might be knee-high little mongrels, or something bigger. It might be an insult, if used in the right tone. Alright, now that that's cleared up, let's see about Dresden. He's a little preoccupied, but we're sure to get into something interesting eventually. Here in Brave Rock, we've lost a few weeks. It's a high holy day of Orlok, Erhard's 14th, 2052 years after the fall.
Tribulations unnumbered. The truth is fluid, unchanging, fleeting, and eternal.
He was right about one thing. Why not another? Anyone could have fit that description. The Blade of the North, strong arm, strong mind, Reaper of the North. What a pile of fish head prophecy that is. How about, I predict Dresden will walk through that door this morning. What are you guys talking about? Liz walked in, Dresden behind. Nothing. I didn't. Shh. Liz looked at Dresden, his nose buried in a book. She laughed at him when he walked into a desk, recovered, and sat down without ever breaking concentration. What? She winked at one of the young men. Prater. He smiled at her. What? Oh, no, we're not. Dresden snapped out of his trance. We settled this yesterday. That monkey brain twaddle isn't worth a mention, much less the obsession you twits give it. Dresden, their new trainer, our best sans Tresson, came into the room. Do you find yourself in an unusual number of insult challenges? Liz was already on her way back out the door. They usually just skip the challenge and go right to the beating. Dresden grunted. Worth it for a little rational thought. Then, for the time being, I agree. We'll open with Ruck. Bayless, guide us in our journey. The class echoed back. Master of magic, we seek your wisdom. Our path is long. Grant us insight to balance for the sake of the practical. Our path is just. The class called back in unison. We partake in your gift, as we partake in all the boons provided by the faith. Our best walked comfortably among the students. Let's talk about that. Biona grants us the knowledge of organized war. Abregreon presents us with the wilderness, which we may subdue and harvest. Omadon inspires us with the strength of mountains and offers the mineral wealth hidden within. We've lived with these things for a generation at least. perhaps from the very beginning of our people. But magic is new. Before the fall of man, it was ours to control, but some interpretations of our ancient past, it was magic for which we forsook the gods. I believe this was at most a small part of our sin, but you can see why the church fears for the souls of axiom users. Mannix, when do you expect to be satisfied with your knowledge of the fire strands? The pterodon cawed lightly. I thought I would by now, but the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. The more I feel like I need to know. As the lecture went on, Dresden was torn. He was pretty sure the conversation with Mannix was arranged, or at least planned. He knew the warlock had been avoiding life outside the school because he was afraid of the distraction. But Dresden believed there was a real danger. Magical learning could cause one to forget their obligations to the clan. He thought many other forms of learning could too, though. No one minded if someone trained for a year in stonework. The argument was circular. Something he once read was poor rhetoric. We don't trust Ziblich because its users are better served to cloister and learn. They will poorly influence each other because they are warlocks, and warlocks are prone to bad behavior. We trust the Masons because they cloister with other Masons, and we trust them. Still, Dresden had no objection to our best teaching methods. Understanding the doctrine of Bayless was just as important as learning Ziblich. The god of magic was the right path, when the destination was the furtherance of the faith, and it always was. When he finished, there was a brief segue before they would chant in honor of Orlok. It was his day, though in a landlocked community such as Brave Rock, it was as minor of a holiday as a high holy day could be. There would be no feasting due to food insecurity. Chanting would have to be enough. During the break, an elven teen, probably older than Dresden by double, brought him a message. The young man was dressed in the lightest of armor and a dagger at his side. He gave a friendly smile full of nervous energy. Even first, second, and third-year warriors must have seemed like heroes to the boy. Dresden took the letter and grunted. Pig on a stick. Bad news? Inquisition. The pterodon nodded. I've never been. It's bad. Arbess began the next chant. Having grown up in a city with a busy port, the answerbacks were automatic. They might have felt nostalgic if he wasn't worried about the sudden appearance of a summons. At least it'll be a short meeting, he thought. No more than 8 hours. Dresden had to bite his tongue to prevent a laugh. Life had become mind-numbing routine. At least this would be a diversion. It was one which allowed time to pass at an uncomfortable rate. In the mornings, he went on watch at the top of the towers well before the city rose. Vool didn't care with its eternal blasting suns, but rising early was the easiest way to look good doing mundane tasks. As a youth, it made sense. The stations from which he stood watch were generally dark, but now it was just habit. The others would join him, one or two at a time. They'd talk about their plans for the day or something interesting from the day before. They'd talk about the heroes of the Stone Clan and others. Governor Eldrin had her share of victories, as did the High Warden Irving, to whom they were technically in service at the moment. The warrior Zosimo Zeitgraven, General Byrne, Dorian Miles of the Doomed, and Isolde Swear all had recent adventures fresh on the lips of bards and the general public. Usually, the conversation was just getting interesting when it was time for Dresden's morning trip to a supply base 50 miles to the south. The most common load was goats. Stinking, rambunctious goats that had no idea how much concentration it took to evoke a pocket space. Sometimes it was chickens. At least those were usually in crates. Once he brought back a horse, but he was pretty sure it wasn't for eating. Not that he would have minded that so much. Waxed turnips, hard breads, cheeses, arrows, bolts, leather goods, almost any freight was a possibility, but goats were always a good bet. Just how many goats are there on Vool? When it came time for that day's afternoon meal, Dresden met his friends and handed Kira the note without a word. "This isn't for an interview," Kira told him. "I told you to stop being so cynical." "I'm not being cynical. It's from the Inquisition. What else could it be?" "Stop talking," she scolded. "It's the Red Boar." He looked at her blankly and shrugged. "It's a very fancy tavern. And we're all supposed to be equal between prole and chief," Donald snorted. "Invitation only," Dresden affirmed. "How's that for equal?" Kira popped him in the head. "This is your invitation, stupid. We'll need to get cleaned up." She didn't give him a chance to argue, practically dragging him downstairs. Kira stripped him, throwing his dirty leathers into the corner. Finding he didn't have anything that was really clean, she dug until finding something that at least didn't smell like goat puke. She washed him with a damp rag and rubbed a sweet oil on his head. She sniffed and growled. "I could roll you across those sheets right now." "Maybe I've been lazy," Dresden said. "Maybe that's what this is about." "Oh, you're not lazy. I guess we just don't have time for it now, but you're going to get it tonight." Dresden hugged her and kissed her, then started getting dressed again. Forever watchful warns of clansmen who just do enough to get by. Maybe that's me." Kira looked at him there in the dark, lost for words. "You're an idiot, Dresden Fane. You work harder than anyone else in this whole city." For emphasis, she pounded her fist into his chest, hard. "Now finish getting dressed. You're not ruining tonight." Dresden already told Arbist he would miss the afternoon session. The priest didn't seem to care much. Tavern or jail cell, he couldn't ignore the summons. He was pretty sure Conroy had been the priest of Eloy who questioned him along with Kimberly back in Opal. You couldn't just refuse men like that, nor could he refuse Kira. He struggled enough keeping her volatile moods placated. If she wanted a fancy meal, he couldn't deny her. And maybe they'd have some beef. The tavern was elegant, Dresden admitted to himself. Fine wood and stone sculptures saturated the structure inside and out. Granite snow leopards watched over the main entrance. Carved wooden bats hung from the front awning, and various spiders were etched into the sandstone and oak alike. 2 dogs lounged under the bats. The canines were quite alive, one a hound, the other a mix of wild and well-bred. The hound let out a breath, made a great show of plopping its head onto the wooden floor. "Now, believe me, I expect to be just as bored as you are." Kira jabbed him in the ribs. "This is important. Don't say anything unless you have to." A softly dressed human met the couple as they entered. Dresden Fane and Kira Histiani, participants in the Battle of Karsai Trajan. "I'll show you to your seats." The young man led them to a long table near an outer wall. There were windows, but the view consisted of a thin alley and a brick wall. Dresden watched something moving around in the open crates of refuse a few feet away. He squinted, trying to figure out what it was. But the creature, or creatures maybe, remained elusive to his limited vision. Dresden's head jerked back around in response to a sharp kick. "Fresh carrots, turnips, and a chicken base?" A fair-skinned woman was speaking. Where the boy's scant dress had been of minor note, Dresden's eyes locked onto the woman's uncovered torso. She wore her hair in a braid, exposing her neck. A silk-laced chain wrapped around her belly, supporting a nearly transparent skirt. It sat so low, a little tuft of hair poked out. "Seared goat meat with hot she squeaked. "Just fill the table with a little of everything, Doria," Conroy told her after the slap to the ass. "They fought at KT. It's not an issue." "We don't have any money left." Kira looked worried, but Dresden put a hand on her knee. "It's okay. It doesn't work that way in a place like this." Feeling out of her depth, she scooted closer. "Okay." "He's right, but you spent all that money you'd hoarded?" Dresden felt a little embarrassed. "It doesn't last long." The tall human sat across from the pair. There was no one else at the table. Now that Dresden looked, there really wasn't that many people in the tavern at all. A green-skinned djinn sat at the center table, all alone, making it look more like an office than a dining table. The whole room was built to make that table the center of attention. The one Dresden sat at was as far away as you could get, but elevated to give a better view. If he wanted to, there was a step against the wall where he could stand. He caught himself looking back towards the movement in the alley, only to be distracted by another question. Have you gotten your tattoos yet? No, Kira filled in. We saw the design. It's so intricate. You know you don't have to pay, Conroy assured her. She grimaced. I know, but Dresden wanted someone talented to do it. He didn't want them to look bad. I see. Well, I suppose there's no hurry. You know, it's something that doesn't happen often. I mean, how many people get into battles involving dragons? Dresden's answer was so guttural, Kira feared he wasn't even heard. Not many at all, she clarified. Food was starting to arrive. The exhibitionist Manelian woman carried a platter full of bowls, while other attendants carried in plates of vegetables and meat. I'll serve you if you wish, she told Conroy. He waved her off. I've been eating all day. She moved around the table, putting her hand on Dresden's shoulder as she passed to Kira. Soup? Kira smiled at the woman and nodded. Dresden was happy she passed and reached. Stabbing a slab of roasted goat's meat, he messily pulled it onto a plate that he had decided was his own. As he did, another server put a mug beside him. Don't make a mess, Kira whispered in his ear, but she didn't seem mad. Her hand was on his leg, very high up for being in public. 2 others arrived to sit at the table. Dresden didn't know either of them, and no introductions were made. Chewing, he noticed there were now people seated around the second-floor railing. He wasn't sure how many had been there when he'd come in. You're commander of that fighting group that ran with Mepios at Lassiter. A veteran Tagara looked at Dresden. I suppose. We'll assume you're one of the good ones. The Minotaur with him bellowed at a roar of laughter. Conroy used the comment to dig. I believe he is. He's subbing for a fighting group over at Stormbound. Running with the High Warden himself, the Tagara's tone was dubious. Kira started to say something, but there was a shout. Chief Ted! For a second, she thought he was there, but it was a toast. The tavern's growing number of patrons raised a clatter, shouted the chief's name, and the more familiar, Buck! 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 Kira realized Dresden roared with him. She smiled wide at the enthusiasm she so rarely saw from him. To war by the sea! Another voice called from the shouts as Buck began to die down. Ride the waves! Ride the waves! Ride the waves! A second chant erupted. Cormac's their commander. Fresh young kid, acolyte of Oggs with some tactics training. Conroy could finally speak. He's not really, Kira blurted. Conroy gave her his full attention. Not really an acolyte? Yeah, he is. Dresden tried to head her off. No. He runs watches and he gets our food, but Dresden leads us to every fight, Kira insisted. He's not even a sub. That's Liz. I like Cormac, but he's not our commander. Rock that boat, baby. Isn't that what you do on the high holy day of Orlok? Good times, good food, and a stab in the back. They say conflict drives a plot. Well, if we had a plot, Kara would be moving us right along. War is hell, folks. When it's not boring you to death, it's trying to kill you with spears and dragons and such. Yeah, I know. How the heck should I know? I'm no warmonger. I just play one on YouTube. Dresden is, though. These psycho Kelds were born to it, raised and honed for violence. They're good at it, too. I don't want to sell the Lurquish and the Iturian short. Half the time I can't even pronounce LXVIII. But believe me, they've got some things going for them too. But on a battlefield, who are you going to bet on? In a normal adventuring society, it's just the desperate and the driven who risk their lives on a regular basis. If you're born killed, though, you probably got dumped into a pit of hungry rats by your 5th birthday. You ran with the bulls at 7, and if you hadn't killed something by 10, it's time to start your life's calling of doing dishes and cleaning outhouses. Personally, I'm pretty happy without all the killing, just writing about it and enjoying the fantasy. The only thing I slay on a regular basis is time watching the shorts. Typical. Do the stuff, DOS homies. Like, subscribe, share. Like, subscribe, share. Leave a comment. Visit my fiction on Amazon for Kindle. Leave a review. Most importantly, please remember to have a great day. See you next time. Cheers.